Now, we must, quote, actively prepare for the possibility of the UK coming under direct threat, potentially in a wartime scenario, according to the Starmer regime. The statement was made alongside the launch of the shiny new national security strategy. And right on cue, Charles, the legacy media is ramping up the fear agenda once again. For example, the Telegraph here.
Yes, it is. And the Joint State Threats Assessment Team has the risk of an attack to the UK at substantial, in other words, unchanged. But this has not stopped the government and the media from encouraging the population to enter into a state of full-blown panic. And as Mike says, this article from the Telegraph is case in point, referring to plans for annual drills relating to an attack on this country, and indeed the recirculation of the Protect and Survive literature from the 1970s and 80s. And quite deliberately, this coincides with the publication of the new National Security Strategy, linked also with the messaging coming from the NATO summit. The central theme here to this document is that we're all going to war, which makes it the government's version of the recently published Strategic Defence Review for civvies. The Prime Minister writes a forward to the document based on the faulty premise that the world has become more dangerous, a passive statement without an active plan, about an active plan. But of course, what he means is that the actions taken by his government and their strategic partners have created enough chaos to suggest that war is imminent. And to that end, quote, we must also now mobilise every element of society towards a collective national effort. Now, the persistent themes are, as much as you might expect, the sense of peril conjured by allusions to the threats presented by Russia and Iran, among others. The strategy posits that, quote, national security today means so much more than it used to, from the health of our economy to food prices to supply chains, from safety on the streets to the online world. End quote. Describing this as a strategy should raise a trade descriptions flag, because the one thing it fails to do is to set out any sort of definitive plan. The language used might be described as woolly and conceptual, and exactly like the Defence Review, the key takeaway from this paper is that the United Kingdom is in absolutely no way prepared for any kind of shock or pressure on its supply chains or lines of communication. Now, at the same time as creating the spectre of a deadly enemy with which to justify such a strategy, it does at the same time confirm to that enemy that the country is in a parlous state, which one might describe as an interesting strategy. Now, the NATO summit, which Mike will cover next, has predictably seen much focus on the technological side of things, with Zelensky continuing to go on about drones and their funding. And this coincides with a piece in the latest issue of Soldier magazine about the compatibility of the deployment of autonomous drones and the laws of armed conflict. Now, this is prompted by the recent launch of the American Red Dragon suicide drone, which is built by AeroVironment, and their promotional video is playing at the moment. The key feature of the development, as referred to in the article, is the, quote, AI brain, which means that it can be configured to take on a fully autonomous mission where it selects and eliminates an enemy target on its own with no human operator in the decision-making loop. And it goes on to say that the use of such technology is, quote, difficult to foresee, end quote, which really means it's a question of when. And for context, these systems are widely used already. Here's another manufacturer's promotional video, Elbit. Elbit, of course, an Israeli firm supplying a lot of technology into the British defence infrastructure already, and a key enabler of the destruction in Gaza, which further raises the fundamental issues of autonomy in the overall context of command and control. Now, Mike will speak about the Americans retaining control of nuclear weapons carried by British F-35 airframes, but purchasing kit from nations which take a particular view on the interpretation of the laws of armed conflict must, by definition, expose a tremendous vulnerability in that area. And the last thing to consider is the potential fallout from overblowing the confected threat. Now, as I said at the outset, the government, under the false pretext of intelligence, is trying to convince the public that there really is an existential threat to the UK. Now, in addition to stoking the nuclear fear, they determine there to be a specific threat of a drone attack from Russia or Iran in particular. Now, the National Security Strategy says, in specific reference to such a drone attack, that some of these technologies will be available to a wider range of threat actors, posing new challenges to the traditional concepts of deterrence and escalation. Now, the Telegraph, again, is happy to do the state's bidding, and here's a headline from earlier in the week. The question for Joe Public, then, is how to determine what is or is not a threat. Now, all of this drone threat signalling coincides with Amazon's plan to launch their Prime Air capability. And this is really not meant to be a flippant point. But if you tell the public to be terrified of everything, then you have to own the consequences.
Well, thank you, Charles. Let's move